I want to welcome everybody to another edition of Public Leadership Institute's online public policy leadership webinars. This particular session, we're going to be talking about what can you do to resist the radical right, and particularly relevant in this new presidential administration, and capitalizing on a desire to lead change across the country, from our communities to our states and to our country. My name is Dave Woodward. I am your host for today's presentation. I'm the National Network Director with Public Leadership Institute. In addition to being a local county official and a former state legislator, I will be helping facilitate this conversation. To that end, just give a little bit of background on Public Leadership Institute. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan policy and leadership center, fully organized to bring public attention to key issues around issues of equity and justice, and to work with public leaders to improve the economic and social conditions for all people. You can get a lot of information about Public Leadership Institute at our website, www.publicleadershipinstitute.org, and there you're going to find a host of publications. This first one, the Progressive Agenda for State and Localities, is one that we're going to spend some time focusing on today. Some housekeeping before we jump into the presentation is that we really do want to capitalize on people's thoughts, reactions, and answer any questions as possible. And so we want to bring you into this discussion today. If you have audio capabilities where you're joining us, if you can click on your hand icon at any time, we'll put you in the queue and we'll unmute you to ask your question. If it's easier, because of where you're joining us, to type questions in the question bar, please do that, and we'll try to leave plenty of time to answer as many of those questions as possible. You can also email me at dwoodward@Public Leadership Institute if you're having any problems during the session. If there's questions that come up afterwards, we'll make certain that we get it to our presenters and the right person to get you the correct answer. And like we said, today's topic is what can you do to resist the radical right? And to lead us into that conversation is Bernie Horn, who's the Senior Advisor to Public Leadership Institute, a former policy director, communication trainer, author, and a leader with our organization, to give us a framework on how do we resist, how do we push back, and how do we fight for what we stand for in somewhat shockingly times. And so without any further ado, Bernie, I'm going to hand things over to you.
Very good. Okay, is the presentation showing?
It is. Perfect.
Great. So, welcome to the new year, the new Trump era, and almost everything that we talk about is available on our website, publicleadershipinstitute.org. You can find the Progressive Agenda, which has all the policy materials, our messaging guide, which is called Voicing Our Values. We have a whole book of legislation about abortion rights. We have about 130 model bills. So we keep this in mind. Almost everything I say is available on the web. I'm going to start by talking about legislation. Now, you don't have to be in a jurisdiction where you have a majority progressive in order to introduce and fight for legislation. Even if you're in a red state legislature or you're in a locality where you can't reasonably pass some progressive legislation, at this moment in time, it's important for us to fight back. And there's a lot of legislation, as I'll show you, that addresses the same issues that are being addressed at the federal level. So that if you introduce legislation, it provides newsworthy opportunities to comment on what's going on at the federal level. You can lead the discussion from your state or locality about what's going on at the state on the federal level and show that it's wrong in the way that you're pushing back. You know, when we introduce our own legislation, we're driving the narrative. When we just sit back and react, it's the other side that's driving the narrative. As I go through these, keep two things in mind. First, we don't have all the answers. Nobody does. This is an unprecedented moment in history. Second, if I'm talking about some particular issue or later on messaging, and you have something to ask or suggest, go ahead and raise your hand using the bar. Click get Dave's attention, and I welcome Dave for you to interrupt with any question that is addressing something that I'm talking about, because I'm going to be going through so many different policies that it may make more sense to answer questions as we go. So I'm going to first talk about legislation, then I'm going to talk about messaging. We're going to walk through 17 different bills that are in the progressive agenda for states and localities, and of those, 11 can be done in localities. So, you know, there are many opportunities for action. We'll start right out. Immigrants, immigration, what is likely to happen? Nothing good. Bad, definitely. Horrible, possibly. What Trump has been saying is that he's going to deport millions of people. Now, when he says it, he uses his, quote, alternative facts, unquote, which means lies. But I'm beginning to think that he actually believes his own lies. When he says 3 million immigrants who are criminals, there's actually only about 700,000. So he's using a bigger number, and I think that we have to assume that he's going to go after 3 million, even though that means going after mostly people who are not criminals. I think that's what we have to expect. So, what can we do? First, legislation that I think is important in every jurisdiction. You can do this in any state, any locality. You have the power in your state or locality over your own employees. And that is to direct your employees not to ask anybody about their immigration status unless they're required to do so by existing federal or state law, which is a very, very rare thing that they would be required to do so. And then you publicize to the public that that's what the employees of your government, including the police, are going to do, so that people will feel comfortable talking to law enforcement and other employees of your government. We cannot protect them, we cannot protect ourselves if we've got a population of people who are afraid to talk to government employees. Now, this is a milder piece of legislation than what's often talked about, which we also favor, which is non-cooperation with the immigration authorities when they have detainer requests. There is concern that Trump is going to take away state and local government money if people, if the governments don't cooperate, if they're, quote, sanctuary cities, unquote. Trump can't do that if you do this legislation. He's not supposed to be able to do that if you have standard ICE legislation. There's only a few laws that have been actually enacted which should be in trouble if Trump goes after government money. Even if, and that's under existing law, even if federal law were to change and Congress were to pass some law that said if governments don't cooperate with the immigration authorities, then they're going to lose certain dollars. Even if they pass such a law, that law, there's an extremely good argument that that law is not enforceable. And the reason is that when the conservatives attacked Obamacare, the Supreme Court ruled under the 10th Amendment that the federal government can't use withholding of money to make states do something. And this is the same situation. In any case, this anyone can do and shouldn't be fearful of doing it. The second thing, this is really mostly for states because this is mostly a criminal law situation. It seems likely that under the current situation where immigrants have good reason to be fearful, that there will be people who will commit extortion, that will threaten to expose people if they're not given what they want. These people may be enforcement agents, or they may be average citizens. In either way, it is essential to make it clear that that's criminal extortion. 4 states have already adopted this law. Our model bill is based upon a law that was passed in Maryland last year. And all of these are model bills that you can find on our website. The next is about racial profiling. You know, what can we expect? There may be more encouragement for racial profiling from the federal government to local law enforcement agents. But they work for you on the state and local level. You can direct them and prevent them from profiling. There's 2 kinds of legislation that's been adopted in many places. One of them prohibits the selection of individuals based upon their race and other factors, and the other is legislation to require training of officers so they can recognize the difference between good policing and misguided stereotyping. The next, and I think that this is very important, there is a lot more, since the election, a lot more hate crimes or crimes that are motivated by race or religion or nationality. You may know that, you know, there was a day not long ago where 60 different Jewish community centers were threatened. Muslims, Latinos, you name it, may be subjected to hate crimes. And I don't think that we can expect the federal government to do much, but you can do something at the state level, and in some places you can also do something at the local level. Our model legislation goes a couple of steps further. It gives you as an option, you could add to existing hate crime laws, which exist in 45 states. You could strengthen them in any number of ways. But one of the ways that you might consider is by including as a type violence against abortion providers and patients, because that is also likely to be sparked by the actions of this administration. And you can protect those people by adding them into existing hate crime legislation. Another type of protection is anti-discrimination laws. I mean, currently there are anti-discrimination laws on the books in the overwhelming number of states and localities, but the question is, how far do they cover, the breadth of the categories that they cover? So they usually cover race, religion, sex sometimes, but there has been a great effort to get these anti-discrimination laws to cover LGBT, and it's important to broaden them to cover not just employment, but public accommodations, education, credit, and housing whenever that is possible. So that's another option to push back. Now, moving away from discrimination and toward Betsy DeVos, our likely new Secretary of Education is the heiress of the Amway fortune, who was a key player in ruining the schools in Michigan. And in Michigan, 80% of, there's a tremendous number of charter schools, and 80% of the charter schools have for-profit management, which is far, 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 far higher than any other state, where overwhelmingly charter schools are run by nonprofits. So I think we have to assume that she's going to attempt to remake other state schools into the Michigan model, because she spent so much time and money making Michigan like that, which Dave can tell us about. So the way that would most likely happen would be through financial incentives, where the Department of Education would divert funding so that less money would go to the normal funding formulas for public schools, and more would be pulled out for special programs for charters, possibly even for-profit charters, and vouchers. Vouchers are not allowed in a great number of states because of the state constitution, but there's many states where I'm sure she would like to get school vouchers or expand school vouchers, and the way to do it would be through federal grants. So that's what we have to watch out for, and the way to respond is to ensure that there are fair funding formulas in our states and localities. And the other way is to have legislation to disclose how non-public schools, like charter schools, voucher schools, use the money that they get. Because generally speaking, or almost everywhere, public schools have to disclose everything, and charter and private schools do not have to disclose hardly anything about how they spend the money. So that's how they siphon off money into their own pockets. people don't know that essentially the scam is to pick off the children who are the cheapest to educate. This is what's done very, very often in Michigan. It's to locate a charter school near a successful public school and lure away the children who are easiest and cheapest to educate. So not the kids who are in special ed. The younger kids are cheaper to educate than the older kids, and spend as little as possible on educating them. Hire, teachers who are very young or not qualified. Pay them very little. Pocket the difference. The way to push back is to require transparency so that people can see how their money is being used. People want tax dollars to be spent in the classroom for the children, and will get very upset if you can show them that it's actually just going to some big corporation. Moving to environment. What's likely here is that the Trump administration will essentially deny the existence of climate change and will support the oil and gas and coal companies over all, renewable energy. But states and localities have a great deal of say in this, mostly states, by requiring a particular percentage of renewable energy over time, which is called a Renewable Portfolio Standard. States can make a tremendous difference. And in fact, 29 states have an existing standard, but these laws can and should be strengthened. The existing RPS standards cover, a tremendous percentage of the U.S. population just because of, the fact that most people live in more progressive jurisdictions. Another thing that you can do, and this is something you can do on the local level, which is to create a climate change task force, commission, essentially a study where you ask them to figure out what's the long-term impact of climate change on that particular jurisdiction and to suggest things that need to be done in preparation. For example, if you're on the coast, where is it likely to flood? If you're in the Midwest, what's the likelihood of storms, or if you're in the West, the increase in the lack of rain and water resources, how to adjust to coming climate change instead of waiting for it to happen. Now, it may seem like it's not worth it to have a kind of a commission to research and talk, but it really is, because it gives you the opportunity to really make the case to the public that the right-wingers are wrong and hurting our children. When you set up a commission, the fact that you set it up is newsworthy. You can get it in the news. The first time that they meet, you can get it in the news. Anytime they hold a hearing, you can get it in the news. When they have a report to issue, you can get it in the news. When the legislative body receives the report and people react, you can get it in the news. It is a great opportunity to take something that we want to talk about and make it something that newspapers and TV and radio can see as appropriate to cover over and over and over again. Another thing that's likely to happen is a great increase in privatization of public services. um, like roads. I think that you can expect that a large portion of the infrastructure plan of the Trump administration is to turn public roads into private toll roads. So the private company does some kind of improvement, they float a bond, they put up a toll in order to pay for it, and we turn over the road for 99 years to the private company. And unfortunately, this has been done in a number of states. We can resist that on the state and local level, but in addition, we should create our own restrictions on privatization within our own state and local governments. That is, to require that the bid process does not outsource things that are better done within the government. Outsourced services are not necessarily cheaper. That's just a myth. It should be required that you prove that it's going to be substantially cheaper to outsource. And there is legislation that does that. There are some places that do that. We're going to be fighting a lot of privatization. Another place where you can create a study, just like global warming, climate change, is the impact of the repeal of the ACA. Now, we know that this is going to be a horrible, horrific thing where maybe as many as 30 million Americans are going to lose their health insurance. There's just no way that the Republicans are going to handle this in a way that's not going to crash the health insurance system. So instead of waiting for them to do their thing or for them to hide what they're doing and let time go by, states and localities can create their own commissions because we want to save as many people as possible. There must be many small steps that could be made to protect certainly not the 30 million Americans, but some of them. Anything we can do to protect any of the people that are going to be thrown off their health insurance is worth talking about, and it's going to require a great deal of study by experts, and this is the way to get them studying and talking about it. And again, when you do something like this, it's many opportunities to stand up and rail against the repeal of the ACA, to talk about how people are going to be hurt in a very real way, and you can do it over and over and over again if you set up the commission, they hold hearings, and they have a report, and so forth. This legislation is being introduced in Maryland in a few days, so it could be done anywhere. Police reform. Now, I'm just kind of lumping this all together because progressive jurisdictions control probably the majority of police, even though sheriffs tend to be very conservative and state troopers tend to be conservative in conservative states. The great majority of policing is in cities, and cities are overwhelmingly controlled by progressives. So we need to step forward and make sure that the police are operating in, with the right rules for use of force, for the weaponry they're carrying, and so forth. In the progressive agenda, there are a number of different things you can do. Body cameras, take away the machine guns and the tanks, require electronic recording of interrogations, which it should be every single interrogation nowadays should be recorded, obviously, but it isn't. But when you do this, and you're in a progressive jurisdiction where, you know, Democrats control the city council, there's a Democratic mayor, don't impose it on the police. Work with the police. They are our employees. It's not going to work unless we can work with them, and it can be done. And if we can't do it in our own jurisdictions, I don't know why we're complaining. It's our responsibility. Chicago has been a Democratic jurisdiction forever, right? Okay, then there's abortion. I'm going to talk about two things you can do, but abortion is going to be under spectacular attack, from defunding of Planned Parenthood to attempts to eliminate abortion or cut it in every possible way. The first thing that should be done in any state that doesn't already have a law to codify Roe v. Wade, and that's, I think 43 states do not have a law. They should have one. You should stand up for the right to abortion in Roe v. Wade. This is great politics, because poll after poll shows that about 70% of Americans favor Roe v. Wade. They do not want it to be overturned. So if you stand up and say, I've got this bill here to codify Roe v. Wade, and get them to understand what that means, you're going to have an overwhelming majority on your side. That legislation becomes important if, in addition to the Supreme Court justice who's going to fill Justice Scalia's seat, if one other seat comes open from one of the moderates, then Roe v. Wade is in very deep trouble. So, if that happens in 2 or 3 years, we need to start passing these laws today. And if you're, that's only on the state level. If you're in a locality, there are a number of things that you can do to protect clinic staff and patients from violence and harassment. There's the demonstrators are encouraged by Trump and his people, and things are just going to get worse. Right now, I don't think people realize how terrible it is in many circumstances when someone wants to enter a clinic and the demonstrators are calling them baby killers and making them fear for their lives in the way that they block the way. And at the same time, there are probably in every state terrible offices that are called crisis pregnancy centers, which are offices run by essentially religious type organizations that are purely anti-abortion, and they pretend to be medical clinics. They look like medical clinics. They advertise like medical clinics. They try to lure pregnant women into their office, pretending to be somewhere that they might be able to get a referral for an abortion, and then they subject them to a series of lies and blame to try to keep them from getting an abortion. Localities can make clinics safer and can have laws against fraudulent crisis pregnancy centers, and you should. Getting to elections, and these are the last three I'm going to talk about. These two are both just state things, because states are the ones that really have the power when it comes to election laws. The first one is there are now quite a number of jurisdictions that have online voter registration, which is a great thing. It both makes it easier to register to vote, and it is much cheaper because you end the data entry of people, entering something from a paper form. And it eliminates a whole lot of mistakes. But there's one step further, and this is now in 6 states, this reasonably new thing called automatic voter registration, where people who interact with government agencies, like people who get a driver's license or an ID card, they are automatically registered to vote unless they proactively say, no, don't register me. It's a terrific system. In Oregon and Colorado and 4 other states have adopted it, and there's just no reason why it shouldn't be done everywhere. It increases registration rates. It saves plenty of money because the whole registration system is a waste of money, and it makes voting more convenient. The other thing that we should be working toward, obviously, presidents should be elected by the majority of Americans. Trump lost by 3 million votes. Right now, there is this piece of legislation called National Popular Vote Agreement Act, which has been enacted into law in 11 states with 165 electoral votes. And the way that it's set up is that if it is adopted by enough states to have a majority of electoral votes, then all the states within the agreement agree to cast all of their electoral votes to the winner of the winner of the national popular vote. So if we just enacted this in another 13 or 14 states, we would have the presidential winner would be the person that gets the majority votes. It does not take a federal constitutional amendment to do this. All it takes is for some more states to come on board. At the moment, it's hard to think of anything more important. You probably know that Trump is claiming that he lost by 3 million only because 3 to 5 million of Hillary's voters were illegal, that they were not people who were not authorized to vote, which is delusional. It's simply delusional, and that's what we're gotta expect for the next 4 years. Just quote facts, alternative facts that have absolutely no backing in reality. I mean, they are fantasy, they're delusion, and I'm afraid he actually believes them, which makes you wonder about his mental state, really. Anyway, the last one I'm going to talk about is strengthening collective bargaining. Unions are going to be under such an attack. I mean, they're going to be battered. Our states and localities where we can do so, we need to make labor peace. If there's a democratic jurisdiction that is fighting with the union, it has got to stop. For example, in Washington, D.C., here in Washington, D.C., our teachers union hasn't had a contract for years and years. There's just no excuse, and we just cannot have this. We have to have some solidarity within our movement. We have to stop fighting within our own members, our side, and stand together. And that's within our control. So I'm now going to take questions about policy, and when we're done with that, I will move on to messaging. So Dave, I assume you're looking to see whether there's any good questions. Ah, I see that it is possible that Dave is not on the line at this moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go on to the messaging, and when he comes back, we'll take the questions. Oh, there. Okay. So let me just write a note to him. Okay. Sorry about that. So, like the policy, our messaging materials are on our website. It's called Messaging Guide, and the title is Voicing Our Values. And we have quite a bit of material on the website on a very wide variety of issues. I'm just going to pick out the pieces that seem most important to the current crisis with the new administration. First is how to talk about our own side. You know, I consider myself a liberal, but it's better messaging to persuadable voters to call yourself a progressive than it is to call yourself a liberal. If you're in a meeting full of liberals, go ahead and call yourself a liberal. There's no problem with it. But if you're actually trying to persuade people, when you have a test of liberal versus conservative, conservative wins that test. But if you have a test between progressive and conservative, progressive holds its own and in many cases actually comes out ahead. So that's why it just works better when you're trying to persuade people. It used to be fine to call ourselves populists. It used to work just fine, but right now the media is, declaring Trump to be a populist, so it's just not going to work for us to call ourselves populists anymore. I would encourage people to say that we are mainstream. This is true now. No matter how far to the left you are much closer to the mainstream than this administration. This administration is so far out there to the right that your average socialist is mainstream. This is a good word. It does not mean moderate. Mainstream means that you're within traditional American political values. And we do stand for American political values. We are the ones who are fighting for, real freedom, opportunity, and security for all Americans. We're the ones that are for all Americans. They are about to shift and rig the system for the rich in every conceivable policy area. How do we talk about them? Whatever you do, do not say conservative. Conservative is a very popular word. Every poll shows that if you call somebody or something conservative, that's like complimenting it. So don't say conservative. They're not conservative. They are real extremists. They are real radicals right now. I mean, they are so far off that people don't even imagine it. They can't understand. At the same time, be careful about some of the words. Like alt-right is their language. Nazi might be appropriate in many cases, but it's not persuasive to to the to the mainstream. You know, if I'm trying to persuade people, I'm not going to call Trump or any of his people a Nazi, even though, you know, if I'm within the progressive, if I'm in a meeting with other progressives, and I'm just talking to the progressives, I'm not going to hesitate to call Steve Bannon a fascist because he is a fascist. What you want to say is radical right, extreme right wing, extremists, extreme or radical agenda. I mean, it's effective and it's accurate. When it's appropriate, don't say alt-right, say white supremacist. But by all means, talk about how we're in the mainstream and they're outside the mainstream. What they're doing is they're putting politics above what's best for America, which is absolutely true. That's how they got elected. And that they don't stand for American values, which they don't. They'll certainly say that they do, but your response is that they only want those values for a small group who just happen to be white, and in most cases happen to be rich and white. They don't stand for American values. We're the ones who do. How to talk about economics. So what you want to do is, they're going to talk about free markets an awful lot. Just don't say free markets. Free markets is a popular phrase, but fair markets is just as popular and it's more accurate. We favor fair markets. They favor unfair markets. They favor rigging the system. There is no such thing as a free market. You never want to say conservative economics because conservative is a popular thing. And again, you can't talk about populism in economics because the word's just been ruined. I suggest, you know, that they're the billionaire's agenda or something like that. You know, that's untested. But what's been tested is we need to benefit all the people, not just the rich. We're against unfair breaks and bailouts for the rich. The rich don't need more breaks and subsidies. They're gaming the system. This is economic injustice or economic unfairness. All those things have been tested. They all work. And that's what's going to happen. It's going to be all about rigging the system to benefit the rich. Dave, if you're back on, you can see whether there are questions that have already been typed in.
Hi, Bernie. This is Michael. Dave had to step off for a second. But there are questions that I have for you.
Yeah, why don't we go to that? Because
Okay.
I'm getting tired of listening to my own voice, really.
We'll start off with one from Steve. Steve asks, in regards to collective bargaining, how can Wisconsin localities follow your advice after Act 10, which prohibits collective bargaining for most public employees?
Well, I'm no expert in Wisconsin, but localities can control their own contracting with their own employees, and they can have union-like contracts, even if they're not officially collectively bargained. There's no law against talking to people who are in unions, finding out what's fair and what's unfair, and doing things that are more fair. And I think that, you know, the idea is to resist the idea or the lie that collective bargaining is bad for anybody. It's good for everybody, and that you do the closest thing you can do.
I just want to take a reminder. I just want to remind everyone that if you would like to ask your question in person, please feel free to click on the raised hand icon, and I will pick you out and be able to. You'll be able to voice your question in person. Moving on, the next question I have asks, do you have a draft bill that says a national candidate cannot be on a state poll unless they release their full taxes within X days before the election?
No, not you mean on a state ballot. I have heard of such legislation. We don't have model legislation, but I would be glad to look for it. If you send an email to me, bhorn, B-H-O-R-N, at publicleadershipinstitute.org, asking for that, I will look for it. We've got some search tools that should be able to find what's been introduced. I haven't seen it, but I think we could find it and send it to you.
Excellent. I saw a raised hand a second ago, but it went off. Again, if you would like to ask your question in person, please feel free. Just click on the raised hand icon, and I will pick you out. Next question is, how about the model bill for the impact of the repeal of the ACA? I didn't see it on the website.
I will look for it tomorrow. I'll make sure it gets up there. Let me just look for a second right now. Yeah. I think that if you go to the model legislation and under health, it's called, this is probably why. It's called the Healthcare for All Assessment Act. Maybe we should have had a name that was more clear, that it's about ACA repeal.
We can, yes. And this is Dave again. I think it's also really important to add that even though, even things, that particularly that piece of legislation, there's a real great opportunity. Local jurisdictions, regional jurisdictions can weigh in on those type of topics.
Are there other questions, Dave or Michael?
Well, Bernie, one other question, and I think it's worth stating if you mentioned it earlier. Even though you're a public leader, school board, city council, some of these topics reach beyond your direct jurisdiction, but there really is an opportunity to bring your public body's voice into the conversation and look for the intersections, and even though you might not be the decision maker, but making it publicly known what things are, because I think it works best when there's definitely say there's a state, a bill that we can organize around, lift up, talk about, express support for. But I think that there's the substance of these things that school boards, city councils, and others can be clamoring for to get voice, that hopefully gives momentum for the introduction of these things at a state or larger level. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Right now, I think that there's an unusual opportunity for legislation that either is, in the form of a resolution, or is legislation that doesn't really stand a chance of passing in a particular state or locality, but that gives you the opportunity to speak out against what's going on with the Trump administration. I think that you'll find that the press will cover things that they wouldn't cover before. I think that you'll find that people will become activists now who otherwise were not paying any attention. I think that local actions or actions in local governments, even where it's not going to make a whole lot of difference, the Trump administration is still going to be able to ruin things, will help persuade Americans and organize progressives. And it's always true, but I think now, doing that now is probably 5 times or 10 times more effective than it was last October.
Right. And so much of this is, I mean, in getting to the messaging piece, so much of this is about shaping the public narrative in which these individual solutions are much part of a world that we want to create. Great. I think we're good, Bernie.
Okay. So I did this one, right? That's the last one. Okay. So there's about 4 more of these slides, I think. How to talk about our values. There are whole chapters in our book, Voicing Our Values, about how to talk about values, and I'm just going to, this is just very brief, but what we don't want to do is to be talking about two Americas, you know, the rich and the poor, or anything that sounds like we're dividing. Language about communitarianism and the common good is not persuasive to people because everybody's kind of an individualist if they're persuadable, right? If you favor the common good, if you care about what's good for the people, what's good for everybody, if you're if you're that kind of person, you're already in our base. What we need to do is to persuade people who are not in our base, but who, when you talk about the policy, they're thinking about how it affects them, their family, their friends. And so that's how we should talk when we're trying to persuade people. So that's why, you know, our values are about freedom, opportunity, and security for all. When we talk about some particular piece of legislation, you know, will provide security for all Americans or for everyone in our state or our locality. That's what people are listening for, is how it's going to affect them personally, not how it's going to affect them in a very general sense. We have a whole chart of words that fit in the family of progressive values, and I encourage you to look at our website or at our Voicing Our Values book for all the various words that fit. But especially right now, justice, fairness, fair share, level playing field are going to be very important values that we need to be lifting up, because this administration is going to be tilting the entire system to benefit the rich, to benefit billionaires like him. And people need to understand that that's what the legislation does. People elected him, or many of the people elected him, thought that he was going to be pushing legislation that's good for the average person. It's the opposite, obviously. They don't realize it, and as the legislation comes down, as we have debate after debate, they have to understand that it hurts them personally, that it is an unfair playing field, that it's unjust, that it's unfair. We're for every American, not just the rich. How to talk about economics. So I already started to talk about this previously, and the economic language that has been recommended in the past still works. It's just that people don't understand, or the persuadable voters didn't understand, that Trump is on the wrong side of this language. When we talk about climate change, people understand that climate change exists. It's overwhelmingly understood by average Americans. They don't understand global warming because of the pushback that, oh, you know, it was a cold winter here. You know, in our town, we had a cold winter. But they do understand that there is increasingly severe weather all over the nation and all over the world. That they do not doubt. Climate change, they do not doubt. Global warming, they may doubt. So talk about climate change, talk about increasingly severe weather, and talk about how we owe it to our children to protect them. We know that renewable energy systems work, and we need to fight the giant oil and coal companies that have been rigging the system to pad their own profits. This language works, and we're going to be fighting an administration that is going to say they don't believe in climate change. How to talk about education. This is tremendously important because we're going to be getting school choice forced down our throats for at least 4 years. And school choice is just a phrase that's an excuse to give money to corporations. That is what it's all about. At least that's what Betsy DeVos thinks. What we need to make very clear is that they are for the privatization of public education. They're for taking public schools, public money, taxpayer dollars, and giving them to private corporations. That's what it's all about. I would never use the phrase public charter school. I mean, it's privatized education, especially the kind that Betsy DeVos is trying to create, where in Michigan, 80% of the schools, 80% of the charter schools are run by for-profits. People don't want their public money to be wasted or diverted to the pockets of private education companies. They just are not aware of it. So that's what we have to hold up. That's what we have to talk about, that we need to spend our tax dollars, our education tax dollars, on our children, not to give money to big corporations, which is, again, that's what's going to be happening. There is a major problem where people on the Democratic side were for, quote, school reform, unquote. They were talking about failing schools and achievement gap and saying that there's a crisis in education and all this stuff. And it was just, they were just falling into the right wing's trap, where what we're doing is we're treating children differently. We're sorting them out into schools that are, you know, increasingly white schools and schools for people of color, and then giving more money or resources or things of value to the white schools. It is a form of resegregation, and our side has helped bring it about. We need to talk about how each and every child needs a quality education. We need to talk about not schools across the country or schools across the state. We need to talk about our children, local schools, schools in our community. That's what people understand and care about. When they think about schools in general or schools across the state, they have a negative feeling about those schools. When you talk about their own public schools or the public schools in their own community, they have a positive idea. You want to just talk about those local schools, make them understand that's what this is all about. That's how you frame it. And you know, there's been a tremendous attack on teachers. We need professional teachers, and there's been a great attack on professional teachers. I would go, you know, if you're talking about teachers, to every time you have the opportunity, I'd call them professional teachers and not just teachers. They're the people who will treat each child the way they need to be treated. They will personalize instruction, understanding what each child needs to succeed. They're the ones that don't want to do the one-size-fits-all education, the ones who don't want to be just teaching to the test. They actually want to fulfill the needs of the children. Tough battle. Another tough battle is about healthcare. So we're going to have this gigantic fight about taking away health insurance from 30 million Americans. The problem is when Americans think of Obamacare or any program as being for the poor or for people in poverty or for anybody other than themselves. You need to talk about the ACA and any policy about how it's going to impact the listener and the listener's family. And it is. A destruction of the ACA is going to increase the cost of insurance for everybody. It's going to decrease the quality of health insurance for everybody because it's going to ruin the marketplace. That's what they need to hear. They need to hear that selfish discussion because that's what they care about, not somebody else's health insurance, their own health insurance. But in this case, it's absolutely true. And, people feel very bad about insurance companies, so blame them. We can't go back to letting insurance companies rig the system for their own profits. And if you have to talk about the poor, people in poverty, or people without insurance, call them hardworking Americans. Make people understand that they deserve health insurance as much as we do. How to talk about immigrants. This may be the last one. Obviously, you're not going to say illegal aliens. You don't want to say illegal at all. You don't want to say illegal immigrants. It's not a question of legal or illegal. I'm sure you've heard, there's no person who's illegal. However, we often say undocumented immigrants, and in fact, undocumented doesn't work very well. To the extent possible, just say immigrants. When you have to limit that, say unauthorized immigrants. It works better than undocumented immigrants. Unauthorized immigrants, when you're talking about unauthorized immigrants, they work hard and pay taxes. And in fact, this is just pure fact. Most have lived in the United States for more than a decade. There's this weird idea that all these people have come across the border, in the last 8 years during the Obama administration. The fact is that hardly anybody has come across the border during the Obama administration because of the economics in the United States. The number of unauthorized immigrants in the United States either held steady or declined during the Obama administration. So it just wasn't economically viable for a lot of people to come to the United States the way it was during the Bush administration. It was the Bush administration that enabled millions of people to come across the border because it helped the big employers in Texas. So what you want to talk about is the current patchwork of immigration programs has been broken for years and years and years. And that's because the right wing wants to play politics instead of fixing the system. Let's fix the system. That's what people want. They want to fix the system. There is hardly any Americans want to deport millions of immigrants. Hardly any. What they want is immigration reform. And we need to stand up for that and point out, not that we're going to get it, but we need to point out that's the problem. It's not the individuals who are the problem, it's the system that's the problem. And that's where I'll leave it. Let's see if we have some more questions.
And if there are any additional questions as it relates to the messaging stuff that Bernie's outlined, you can type question in the question bar. If you have audio capabilities, raise your hand. We'd love to hear them. But I think Bernie, I guess I'll throw out maybe the first one, that, the message framework you talked about this, there's obviously a direct intersection on the solutions that we talked about at the beginning of the session and the best ways to talk about these issues in this broader context. And you really need both. If we're going to actually move the needle, persuade the persuadable, and create momentum to at least charge forward with the progressive solutions we're talking about, we need good policy solutions coupled with message tested and best practices around messaging. And so I guess it's more of a comment than a question. That people should be thinking about when we introduce these solutions at the local, county, state level, being very ready to use these best practice message frames to make the strongest case forward about these ideas. Don't get tied into the minutia. Don't get tied into, the detailed facts. Even though we need to have, we should have facts on our side for sure. But realize that these fights in so many ways, we're zeroing in this persuadable audience to, get us to critical mass of support. So I don't know if you want to react to that or give further feedback. The
way I'd like to react is to say nobody really knows what's the best way forward. We have never been in this situation before. Nobody's really been in this situation before. If you have ideas for other legislation to challenge the right wing, we are always interested, and our general email address is leadership@publicleadershipinstitute.org. We read our mail. If you have ideas, please send them. And the same thing is true of the messaging. These are messages that were tested before Trump became president, and they almost certainly work, but there's probably other things that work now that were inconceivable before November. So you may have some ideas that might work, and we are interested in them. Believe me, there are other communications people as well, and we're trading ideas back and forth, and we need to get the best language to attack this catastrophe. So please make suggestions.
Excellent. A question came in from William, who asked, we talked about this as legislation, ordinances, local resolutions, etc. How many states can actually vote on some of these solutions using the public referendum tool, like a ballot initiative?
I believe it's 24 or 25, depending on how you count it.
Right.
And that information's at the Ballot Initiative Strategy Center, which is www.ballot.org. Absolutely, referenda are a good way to raise up issues where the special interests stop them from being resolved in legislative bodies. However, it does tend to be an expensive process if you're doing it statewide. There are quite a number of jurisdictions where you can do local referenda, and that's much more economical. But I would always keep ballot initiatives in mind as a tactic, because we've accomplished a lot. As a matter of fact, in this past election, almost everything that was enacted by ballot initiative was progressive.
Exactly. And it's something that can, and I think INBISC is definitely maybe the authority in the space, can be used to complement a broader narrative that has the ability to help elect people who share those common sense values, can be that powerful tool to magnify and amplify the work that's happening in a jurisdiction or even at a state level, to bring it to a greater audience. So definitely should be a tool to be considered in all of this. All right. Well, I think that covers all the questions. Want to close it out. Want to remind people to always stay on the lookout for these sessions that we have every other week at the same time on a variety of topics. Hope people found this useful based on the feedback and the questions. I think that's the case. This session has been recorded, so it will be posted up on our website so that you can go back to and use it as a reference. On your control panel, there was a copy of the 2017 Progressive Agenda Manual where a lot of the information that came from is captured and more. And you can always go directly to our website at www.publicleadership.org and be able to access these policy solutions with hyperlinks to model policy and other information. If there are any further questions, feel free, I mean, as Bernie said, always, if you have ideas about some policy, even if you're not even, don't have the concrete solution, but you have like a general framework, please consider emailing us at leadership@publicleadership.org. And stay in touch. I mean, Bernie summed it up, that no one has the right answer exactly what we need to do, except that not only do we need to resist when there's attack on our progressive values, but we need to be very proactive in our approach and force the conversation to a space that talks about our solutions that we're trying to bring forward. And I think this is a framework for doing that, and it fits nicely in an organizing space, in a political space, and working with our public leaders around at the state and local level around the country. So without any further ado, Bernie, thank you very much for leading us through this conversation. I think it's been great.
Thank you, Dave.
All right. All right, until next time, everybody, be sure to check, always stay in touch with our website at www.publicleadership.org. Make sure that we have your email contact, and we'll keep you abreast of new topics, new sessions, new information to really resist the oncoming assault by the right wing to roll America back. Thank you all, and look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.